The darkness was absolute. May 19, 1944, 1:50 in the morning, and Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton couldn't see his own hands in the pitch-black Combat Information Center of USS England. But he could hear everything, the ping of active sonar echoing through steel bulkheads, the crackle of radio static, the breathing of 23 men packed into a space designed for 15, and beneath it all, transmitted through the water and into the hull, the unmistakable sound of a Japanese submarine trying to stay silent 400 feet below. Pendleton was 37 years old. This was his first combat patrol as a commanding officer. His combat record was simple: 0 enemy kills, 0 commendations, 0 reason for anyone to remember his name. In 12 days, that would change so dramatically that Admiral Ernest King, the man who commanded every ship in the United States Navy, would send a message heard across the entire Pacific Fleet. But right now, standing in the red-lit darkness with sweat running down his back, Pendleton had no idea his ship was about to accomplish something no vessel in naval history had ever done before or has done since. The sonar operator's voice cut through the tension. Contact bearing 270, range 1,500 yards, speed 6 knots, depth approximately 200 feet. One submarine, moving slowly, trying to sneak past the American destroyer escort screen. The Japanese Imperial Navy had positioned 7 submarines in a scouting line across the route to the Marianas. Their orders were simple: detect the American carrier task forces, report their positions, help Admiral Soemu Toyota understand where the next major American offensive would strike. These weren't just any submarines. These were the eyes of the Japanese fleet. Without them, Japanese commanders would be blind. With them, they might predict American movements, position their battleships, launch preemptive strikes, turn the tide of a war that was slowly slipping away from them. And USS England had been sent to kill them all. But here's what made this moment so impossible, so absurdly unlikely that when it was over, naval historians would struggle to believe it actually happened. England wasn't a fleet destroyer. She wasn't a cruiser. She wasn't one of those massive warships that dominated the Pacific with their big guns and thick armor. She was a Buckley-class destroyer escort, 77 feet shorter than a fleet destroyer, half the crew, half the armament, built for one purpose and one purpose only: hunting submarines in the Atlantic, protecting convoys from German U-boats, doing the unglamorous work that didn't make newspaper headlines. Her main battery? 3 3-inch guns. Not the massive 5-inch guns of a real destroyer, not the 14-inch rifles of a battleship. Little 3-inch pop guns that couldn't hurt anything more dangerous than a patrol boat. But mounted on her forward deck sat something most captains in the Pacific Fleet didn't trust: something new, something that had been failing in trials for 2 years, something that British inventors had created, and American sailors had been cursing ever since it arrived. 24 spigot mortars arranged in 4 rows of 6. The British, with their gift for understated names, called it Hedgehog. The projectiles fired 200 yards ahead of the ship in a circular pattern, 130 feet in diameter. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds and carried 35 pounds of Torpex explosive. Contact fuses. They only exploded if they hit something solid: a submarine hull, a conning tower, anything metal and hollow and filled with Japanese sailors. This was revolutionary, and here's why. Depth charges had been killing submarines for 3 decades. The procedure was brutally simple: roll them off the stern, set the hydrostatic fuse for estimated depth, hope the submarine was still there when the charges reached detonation depth. Then pray. The statistics told a story that should have terrified every submarine hunter in the Navy. British forces had launched 5,174 depth charge attacks during the entire war up to this point. They had scored 85.5 confirmed kills. Do that math. 1 kill for every 60.5 attacks, a 1.65% success rate. Why so terrible? Because by the time depth charges rolled off the stern and sank to detonation depth, submarines had already moved. A submarine traveling at 6 knots covered 10 feet every second. Depth charges took anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds to reach a submarine at 300 feet. That meant the submarine could be 300 to 600 feet away from the explosion by the time the charges detonated. and even if you guessed right on direction, the explosions disturbed the water so badly that sonar became completely useless for 15 to 20 minutes. The water churned with turbulence, gas bubbles, temperature layers mixing, creating false echoes everywhere. Submarines escaped in that chaos, slipping away while the hunters groped blindly through disturbed water. Hedgehog changed the entire equation. Forward throwing meant you maintained sonar contact throughout the attack. You could track the submarine right up to impact. The projectiles fired ahead of the ship, splashed into the water, sank at 23 feet per second. Silent misses. If they missed, they hit the bottom and stayed silent. No explosion, no water disturbance, no lost sonar contact. You could attack again immediately, adjusting your aim based on real-time tracking data. But if they hit, if even one projectile struck a submarine hull, the contact fuse detonated 35 pounds of Torpex explosive against the pressure hull. One hole was enough. At 200 feet depth, seawater enters a submarine through a 3-inch hole at approximately 400 gallons per minute. The submarine floods, loses buoyancy, sinks deeper. At deeper depths, water pressure increases. The holes get bigger. More water floods in. The submarine becomes a tomb. But here's the problem that made every captain in the Pacific skeptical. Hedgehog had only achieved a 5% success rate in early trials. 1 kill for every 20 attacks. Better than depth charges, yes, but not good enough to trust your life to. Crews didn't believe in it. Captains preferred the familiar thunder of depth charges, the massive explosions that at least felt like you were fighting back even if you were missing. Walton Pendleton trusted numbers instead. He had reviewed the statistics. The latest data from the Atlantic showed Hedgehog achieving 1 kill for every 5.7 attacks. Compare that to depth charges, 1 kill for every 60 attacks. The mathematics were absolutely clear. Hedgehog was 10 times more effective than depth charges. But statistics compiled in the Atlantic against German U-boats didn't mean anything here in the Pacific against Japanese submarines, with different tactics, different training, different evasion techniques. Pendleton was about to find out if those numbers held true when facing Imperial Japanese Navy submariners, who had been preparing for this war for a decade. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had decoded a Japanese transmission 4 days earlier. Submarine I-16's orders were crystal clear. Proceed to Bougainville, arrive by 2200 hours May 19th. Take up patrol station, begin surveillance operations. The codebreakers at Frupak had given the Americans something submarines relied on never having: perfect intelligence. The Japanese didn't know their codes were compromised. They didn't know every transmission was being read in real time. They didn't know the Americans were positioning hunter-killer groups directly in their path. England and 2 sister ships, George and Raby, had positioned themselves along I-16's route. The trap was set. Now the prey was approaching. "Contact is diving," the sonar operator called out, making radical turns, changing depth rapidly. Standard Japanese evasion procedure. The submarine commander knew he had been detected. He was executing the tactics that had saved hundreds of Japanese submarines over the previous 2 years. Radical turns to throw off firing solutions, rapid depth changes to make the Americans guess, maximum speed to get out of the attack zone before weapons could reach him. Pendleton checked the plot. I-16 was at 200 feet and descending, turning 30 degrees every 90 seconds. Speed 7 knots. The submarine commander was good. He was making the mathematics difficult. "Load Hedgehog," Pendleton ordered. "Prepare for firing solution." The crew jumped into action. On the forward deck, sailors loaded 24 projectiles into the spigot mortars. Each projectile had to be carefully seated, the propellant charge checked, the contact fuse armed. In the Combat Information Center, the fire control team calculated the firing solution. Submarine bearing, range, depth, speed, course. The projectiles would take approximately 9 seconds to reach 200 feet depth. In 9 seconds, a submarine moving at 7 knots would travel approximately 105 feet. The circular pattern of projectiles was 130 feet in diameter. If the prediction was accurate, the submarine would be inside the pattern when the projectiles arrived. If first attack solution ready, the fire control officer reported. It was 1:41 in the afternoon. The night engagement had lasted through dawn and into the afternoon, both ships maneuvering for position, I-16 trying to break contact, England maintaining sonar tracking through every turn and depth change. Fire Hedgehog. 24 projectiles arced through the afternoon sky. They looked almost graceful, spinning as they flew, trailing smoke. They splashed into the Pacific in a circular pattern, disappeared beneath the surface, sank at 23 feet per second into the darkness below. Silence. Every man in the Combat Information Center held his breath. If the projectiles hit, they would hear explosions. If they missed, they would hear nothing. Just silence. Just the submarine getting away. Nothing. Complete silence. Miss. Contact has turned, the sonar operator reported. Bearing now 310, depth 250 feet. I-16 had guessed the attack point correctly and turned away during the 9 seconds of projectile descent. The pattern had landed where the submarine used to be, not where it was now. Reload Hedgehog. Calculate new firing solution. The crew reloaded. 24 more projectiles. The fire control team recalculated. I-16 was deeper now, 250 feet. The projectiles would take 11 seconds to reach that depth. In 11 seconds, a submarine moving at 7 knots would travel 135 feet. The circular pattern needed to predict exactly where I-16 would be in 11 seconds. Second attack ready. Fire. 24 projectiles arced through the sky again, splashed into the water, descended into darkness. One explosion. A single detonation that lifted England's bow 3 feet and knocked sailors off their feet. Not enough. One projectile out of 24 had found the submarine, one hole in the pressure hull. At 250 feet, water was flooding in at approximately 500 gallons per minute through that 1 3-inch hole. But IB-16 was a large submarine, 358 feet long, carrying enough reserve buoyancy to stay operational even with one compartment flooding. The submarine commander immediately executed emergency procedures: close watertight doors, isolate the flooded compartment, blow ballast tanks to compensate for the weight of incoming water. I-16 was wounded but still alive. Contact depth now 325 feet, the sonar operator reported. Speed dropping to 4 knots. Pendleton understood immediately. I-16 was trying a desperate gambit. Go deep below the normal operating depth of American anti-submarine weapons. Most destroyer escorts set their Hedgehog firing solutions for depths between 150 and 300 feet. Going to 325 feet might put the submarine below the predicted attack depth. But the fathometer revealed the ocean floor was at 2,400 feet. I-16 could go much deeper if the commander was willing to risk it. Japanese Type B submarines had a test depth of 330 feet and a crush depth estimated at 500 feet. Going to 325 feet meant I-16 was operating at the edge of her design limits. Third attack solution ready. Depth set to 325 feet. Fire. Miss I-16 turned inside the pattern. The projectiles landed in a perfect circle around empty water. The submarine was 150 feet away from the nearest projectile. Contact bearing 025, depth 325, speed 3 knots. The sonar operator called out. Wait, contact is turning again, now bearing 095. I-16's commander had executed a brilliant double turn, faking one direction, and then immediately reversing. The maneuver cost speed and depth control, but it had successfully confused the attack solution. The submarine was now outside the predicted area. This was the moment Pendleton had to make a choice. He had fired 3 Hedgehog attacks, 72 projectiles expended. England carried 240 projectiles total. He had 168 remaining, 7 more attacks at most, and I-16 was still alive, still maneuvering, still fighting. Some captains would have switched to depth charges at this point. Depth charges were familiar, reliable. They made big explosions that at least felt like you were hurting the enemy, even if you were missing. Pendleton stayed with Hedgehog. The mathematics were clear. Keep sonar contact, keep attacking. Eventually, the submarine commander would make a mistake. Fourth attack solution ready. Fire. Miss again. I-16 turned inside the pattern at the last second. The Japanese commander was anticipating the attacks, watching his depth gauge, estimating descent time, turning at the moment he calculated the projectiles were arriving. It was 2:33 in the afternoon. Over 12 hours of continuous engagement. The crew was exhausted. The Combat Information Center stank of sweat and fear and electrical equipment running too hot. But Pendleton's voice never wavered. Fifth attack solution ready. Contact depth 325 feet, bearing 180, speed 4 knots. Fire. 4 detonations, then 6. Then the ocean exploded. The massive underwater blast lifted England's stern completely clear of the water. Sailors on deck grabbed for anything, bolted down. In the Combat Information Center, men were thrown against bulkheads. Equipment tore loose from mounting brackets. Coffee mugs flew through the air. For 3 seconds, the entire ship shuddered as the shock wave rolled under the hull. When the surface calmed, Pendleton ordered a slow circle around the attack point. 20 minutes later, debris began surfacing. Oil first, thick black crude petroleum spreading in an expanding circle. Then wood fragments, pieces of decking, shattered furniture. Fabric, pieces of uniforms, blankets, personal items. A sailor's cap floated to the surface with Japanese characters still visible. Then came the evidence that removed all doubt. Pieces of the pressure hull, twisted metal with rivets still attached, painted gray with Japanese Navy markings. I-16 was gone. 107 men dead. The submarine had imploded when multiple Hedgehog projectiles struck the pressure hull simultaneously at 325 feet. The compressed air inside the submarine had exploded outward through the breaches, and then seawater had rushed in at incredible pressure, crushing the remaining air pockets, flooding every compartment in seconds. Pendleton made a note in the action report. 5 Hedgehog attacks to kill 1 submarine. 1 hit from the second attack had wounded the submarine. 4 to 6 hits from the 5th attack had destroyed it completely. The success rate was 20% on this first engagement. Better than the 5% from early trials. Much better than the 1.65% success rate of depth charges. The weapon worked. The crew believed it now. They had heard the explosions, watched the debris surface, seen the oil slick spread across 2 square miles of ocean. Hedgehog wasn't just a theory anymore. It was proven. But England's mission had just begun. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific received the decoded intelligence on May 20th at Tulagi. Commander Hamilton Haines read the intercepted Japanese orders with growing excitement. The Japanese 7th Submarine Squadron had deployed 7 Type RO submarines along a designated patrol line called NA. The submarines were positioned at precise 30-mile intervals, stretching from Truk Island to the waters west of Manus. 104, 105, 106, 108, 109, 112, 116. 7 submarines, each carrying 56 crew members, total of 392 Japanese sailors. Their mission was clear: detect American carrier task forces moving toward either the Marianas or the Palau Islands, report their positions to Admiral Toyota, give the Japanese combined fleet enough warning to intercept and destroy the American carriers before they could launch their aircraft. This was the critical intelligence battle of the Pacific War. Aircraft carriers had replaced battleships as the decisive weapon. The side that found the enemy carriers first could launch strike aircraft and destroy the enemy before they could respond. These 7 Japanese submarines were positioned to give Admiral Toyota that crucial first detection advantage, and Frupak had just handed the Americans a complete map of where every submarine would be. Haines ordered England to join destroyer escorts George and Raby. 3 ships, 7 targets. The mathematics seemed impossible. Even if England's 20% success rate held, they would need approximately 35 Hedgehog attacks to kill 7 submarines. England carried enough ammunition for 10 attacks. George and Raby carried similar loads. Combined, the 3 ships had enough ammunition for approximately 30 attacks total. The margin for error was razor thin. The hunter-killer group departed Purvis Bay on May 21st. They formed a line abreast formation, spreading out with 16,000 yards between ships during darkness. Each ship ran radar sweeps every 30 seconds. Sonar pinged continuously. The Japanese submarines were maintaining strict radio silence now. No more transmissions for Frupak to decode. The hunters would have to find the submarines through electronic detection, patience, and mathematics. Pendleton studied the charts in his cabin. The NA patrol line stretched across routes Admiral Halsey's task forces had used in previous operations. The Japanese were being predictable, stationing submarines where American forces had moved before, hoping the Americans would use the same routes again. But the Americans knew where the picket line was. That gave them an enormous advantage. They didn't have to search randomly. They could sail directly to where the submarines would be. The question was timing. Japanese submarine operations followed predictable patterns. Surface at night to recharge batteries. Dive at dawn. Run submerged during daylight hours. Surface again after sunset. The window for radar detection was narrow. Submarines were visible on surface radar, but they were fast. A Japanese submarine commander could crash dive in 60 seconds, reach 200 feet depth in 3 minutes, disappear into the black water before the destroyer escorts could close to attack range. England's crew had drilled for this exact scenario. Sonar operators practiced tracking diving submarines, calculating depth changes, estimating speed and course. The Hedgehog crews practiced loading procedures until they could prepare all 24 projectiles in 90 seconds. Fire control officers memorized the mathematics: projectile descent rate, submarine speed, turning radius, depth prediction. Every attack was a gamble. Contact fuses meant certainty. If the projectiles exploded, they hit something. If they stayed silent, they missed. But the pattern meant multiple chances. 24 projectiles falling in a 130-foot circle. If even one projectile hit, it might be enough to wound the submarine, slow it down, make the next attack easier. 7 submarines, 56 men per submarine, 392 Japanese sailors total. Every Hedgehog attack could kill up to 56 men in approximately 9 seconds. At 3:50 in the morning on May 22nd, George's radar operator detected a surface contact at 15,000 yards. The first submarine, RO-106, was recharging her batteries, running on the surface under diesel power, completely vulnerable. She never saw the 3 destroyer escorts coming. George's searchlight caught RO-106 on the surface at 3,000 yards. The submarine's bridge watch spotted the light, hit the dive alarm immediately. Seawater flooded into the ballast tanks through open vents. The submarine's bow angled down sharply. Within 90 seconds, RO-106 was completely submerged, descending rapidly toward 300 feet depth. George fired Hedgehog at 4:15 a.m. The projectiles splashed into dark water where the submarine had disappeared. Silence. Complete miss. RO-106 had traveled over 400 feet during the projectile descent time. England regained sonar contact at 4:25, range 1,400 yards. USS was running deep, making radical turns every 2 minutes, executing textbook Japanese evasion tactics. Turn inside the attack pattern, change depth constantly, make the Americans guess. Never run straight for more than 90 seconds. Pendleton's sonar operator tracked every turn, called out every depth change. The data fed directly to the fire control solution. First attack missed. RO-106 turned 30 degrees during projectile descent. The submarine had moved 150 feet away from the predicted position. Second attack at 5:01 a.m. 24 projectiles formed their circular pattern, sank through darkness at 23 feet per second. 3 detonations. Then the ocean exploded again. The massive underwater blast was even larger than I-16's death. The pressure wave rolled across the surface like a physical thing, creating a dome of rising water that collapsed back with a thunderous crash. England's hull shuddered so violently that rivets popped loose from deck plates. George and Raby, positioned 4,000 yards away, felt the shock wave through their hulls. At sunrise, the oil slick was half a mile wide. Debris floated everywhere. Metal fragments, wood splinters, pieces of equipment, personal items, bodies. RO-106 had been torn apart by the explosion. Multiple Hedgehog projectiles had struck the submarine simultaneously. The pressure hull had ruptured in at least 5 locations. The submarine had imploded instantly, crushing every compartment, killing all 56 crew members in less than 2 seconds. Kill number 2. 24 hours after I-16. The 3 destroyer escorts reformed their search line, 16,000-yard spacing, continued northeast along the NA patrol line. 5 more submarines were out there somewhere. The Americans had sunk 2 submarines in 36 hours. If they maintained that pace, they could clear the entire patrol line in 1 week. But the Japanese were learning. Submarine commanders heard nothing from RO-106. No distress calls, no emergency transmissions, just silence. In the Imperial Japanese Navy, silence meant death. The remaining submarine commanders began changing their tactics. At 6 a.m. on May 23rd, Raby's radar detected another surface contact. Range 22,000 yards. The contact dove immediately, before any destroyer escort could close to visual range. This submarine commander had learned from RO-106's mistake. Stay deep, run silent, make them find you with sonar instead of radar. Raby gained sonar contact at 6,200 yards. RO-104 was running deep, 400 feet, maximum operating depth. The submarine commander was using the ocean depth as protection, betting that American weapons couldn't reach him down there, betting that firing solutions became too difficult at extreme depth. Raby fired 4 Hedgehog attacks starting at 6:17. All misses. RO-104 turned inside every pattern, the submarine commander anticipating each attack, watching his depth gauge, estimating when projectiles would arrive, turning at precisely the right moment to move outside the circular pattern. George tried next. First attack missed at 7:17. Second, third, and fourth attacks all missed between 7:30 and 8:10. RO-104's commander was exceptional. He had figured out the timing. He knew Hedgehog projectiles took approximately 17 seconds to reach 400 feet depth. In 17 seconds, his submarine could travel 170 feet at 6 knots. Every time he heard the splash of projectiles hitting the water above him, he executed a hard turn, moving outside the 130-foot circular pattern. Division Commander Haynes watched England approach for her turn at 8:30. Pendleton's crew had 2 confirmed kills in 36 hours. George and Raby had fired 8 attacks with 0 results. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone in the task group. England was different. Her sonar operators were faster. Her Hedgehog crews were more efficient. Pendleton's firing solutions were more accurate. Whatever combination of training, skill, and luck England possessed, it was working where other ships were failing. Haynes radioed 5 words that would become famous throughout the Pacific Fleet. "Oh hell, go ahead, England." Pendleton acknowledged the transmission and ordered his crew to attack stations. They had been watching George and Raby fail for over 2 hours. They had seen exactly what RO-104's commander was doing, turning inside the pattern at the last second, using the 17-second descent time to predict when projectiles would arrive. The solution was mathematics. If the submarine turned every time at the moment of splash, then the firing solution needed to predict the turn, lead the target by the expected turn distance. Pendleton calculated the variables. RO-104 had been turning 30 degrees to port on every attack. The submarine was 400 feet deep, traveling at 6 knots. In 17 seconds, the submarine would travel 170 feet. A 30-degree turn would move the submarine approximately 85 feet perpendicular to its original course. The firing solution needed to aim 85 feet ahead of the submarine's predicted turn position. First Hedgehog attack missed. RO-104 turned, but the prediction was slightly off. The submarine ended up 40 feet outside the circular pattern. Pendleton recalculated. The submarine commander was turning 30 degrees, but he was also reducing speed during the turn, dropping from 6 knots to 4 knots. That reduced the distance traveled during descent from 170 feet to approximately 115 feet. Second attack at 8:34. Adjusted firing solution accounting for speed reduction during turn. 10 detonations, maybe 12. The explosions merged into one continuous roar. Breaking up noises followed immediately. The unmistakable sound of metal tearing, bulkheads collapsing under pressure, compartments flooding. Then 3 minutes later, a major secondary explosion. RO-104's batteries had ruptured when seawater flooded the battery compartment. The chemical reaction between seawater and battery acid created chlorine gas, while the electrical short circuits ignited hydrogen gas accumulated in the battery spaces. The combined explosion blew out entire sections of the submarine's hull. Oil and debris surfaced at 10:45 a.m. Large quantities this time. The submarine had broken into at least 3 major sections, each section releasing its contents as it sank to the ocean floor 2,000 feet below. Kill number 3. 3 days. 3 submarines. 163 Japanese sailors dead. And England still had 4 more targets ahead. Admiral Soemu Toyota reviewed the patrol reports at Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo. 7 submarines deployed to the NA line. 3 submarines missing. No distress calls, no emergency transmissions. Just silence. 1 submarine every 24 hours. The pattern was obvious and terrifying. Something was killing his submarines faster than German U-boats were dying in the Atlantic. The Americans had developed a new weapon, or a new tactic, something the submarine commanders couldn't evade. Toyota issued emergency orders to the remaining 4 submarines. New patrol depth, minimum 400 feet at all times. New surface protocol, no battery recharging unless absolutely necessary. Limit surface time to 30 minutes maximum. New evasion tactics. At first detection, go completely silent. Shut down all non-essential machinery. Reduce speed to 2 knots. Become invisible to sonar. RO-116 received this transmission on May 23rd at 11:00 p.m. Her commander read the orders with growing fear. 3 sister submarines had vanished in 3 days. The Americans were hunting them. The Americans knew where they were. At 1:20 a.m. on May 24th, George's radar detected RO-116 on the surface at 15,000 yards. The submarine dove immediately at 1:30, following the new emergency protocols. But England had already established sonar contact at 1:50. This time the Japanese commander tried something different. Instead of going deep like RO-104, he went shallow, 150 feet. Most submarine commanders dove deep, putting maximum water between themselves and the surface, creating maximum cushion against explosions. RO-116's commander did the opposite. He stayed shallow, made sharp turns every 60 seconds, bet that the Americans would set their firing solutions for deep targets like the previous engagements. Pendleton's sonar operator called out the shallow depth. The fire control team adjusted the solution immediately. Hedgehog projectiles would reach 150 feet in approximately 7 seconds. The submarine was traveling at 8 knots, turning every 60 seconds. In 7 seconds, the submarine would travel 95 feet. First attack at 2:14. 3 detonations, maybe 5. Not the massive explosion of previous kills. The projectiles had struck RO-116's pressure hull, creating 3-inch holes at 150 feet depth. At that depth, seawater enters at approximately 400 gallons per minute per hole. 3 to 5 holes meant 200 to 2,000 gallons per minute, flooding into the submarine. Breaking up noises weren't loud this time. Just the groan of metal under increasing pressure, as the submarine settled deeper. More holes meant more water. More water meant more weight. More weight meant the submarine sank deeper, even as the commander tried to blow ballast tanks and maintain depth control. At 300 feet, the pressure doubled. Water entering through the existing holes accelerated to 800 gallons per minute per hole. New breaches opened as the pressure hull flexed under the load. At 400 feet, the pressure increased again. The temperature inside the submarine rose to 200 degrees, as air compressed under the weight of incoming water. Within 6 minutes of the first Hedgehog detonations, everyone aboard RO-116 was dead. Their lungs had seared from breathing superheated air. The submarine continued sinking, flooding, breaking apart. It hit the ocean floor at 2,100 feet depth at approximately 2:45 a.m. Small quantities of oil and debris surfaced at 7:02 after sunrise. The oil slick expanded slowly over the next 24 hours, eventually covering several square miles as the submarine's fuel tanks ruptured under pressure. 56 more Japanese sailors dead. Kill number 4. 5 days, 4 submarines. Word reached Admiral Ernest King at the Navy Department in Washington, D.C., Chief of Naval Operations, the man who commanded every ship in the United States Navy. King was not known for praise. He was famously difficult, demanding, impossible to impress. King read the action reports from the Pacific. 1 destroyer escort. 4 confirmed kills in 5 days, using a weapon most captains didn't trust. Maintaining a success rate of approximately 30%, 3 times better than Hedgehog's average performance in the Atlantic, 20 times better than depth charges. King sent a message to Third Fleet. It was simple, direct, and would become one of the most famous statements of the Pacific War. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. The phrase spread through the Pacific Fleet within hours. Radio operators repeated it. Ship captains quoted it in their logs. Sailors wrote it in letters home. England was becoming famous. The little destroyer escort that could kill submarines faster than anyone believed possible. But fame brought attention, and attention brought new problems. On May 25th, Admiral Halsey sent orders to pull England from submarine hunting, reassign her to carrier escort duty. The reasoning was sound. 4 kills made England's crew the most experienced anti-submarine unit in the Pacific. Experienced crews were rare, valuable, difficult to replace. Why risk losing them to a lucky Japanese torpedo when they could teach their techniques to other crews? Commander Haynes refused. He reviewed the charts, calculated the numbers. 3 submarines remained on the NA patrol line. RO-105, RO-108, RO-109. England had killed 4 submarines in 5 days. The mathematics suggested she could kill the remaining 3 submarines in 3 more days. Pull England now, and the mission stayed incomplete. The Japanese submarines would continue their patrol, continue reporting American fleet movements. The intelligence advantage would be lost. More importantly, Haynes understood something Admiral Halsey didn't see from his headquarters. England's crew had developed something beyond training or equipment. They had developed an instinct for submarine hunting. Pendleton could predict submarine commander decisions. The sonar operators could track through water conditions that confused other ships. The Hedgehog crews could load and fire faster than any other unit in the fleet. That couldn't be taught in a training course. That came from combat experience, from killing submarines, from trusting the weapon and the mathematics. Halsey agreed to 1 more patrol, 3 days. Find the remaining submarines or return to base. At 11:03 p.m. on May 26th, Raby gained radar contact on RO-108 at 15,000 yards, 110 nautical miles northeast of Seidler Harbor. The submarine dove immediately. England gained sonar contact at 11:15, range 1,650 yards. RO-108's commander made the same mistake as RO-116. Stayed shallow, made radical turns. Believed the Americans couldn't track him effectively at shallow depth. He was wrong. Pendleton's sonar operators had tracked 4 submarines before this one. They knew every evasion tactic, every depth change, every turn pattern. They could predict what the submarine commander would do before he did it. Raby moved in for the kill, but her first Hedgehog attack at 11:18 missed completely. RO-108 had turned during projectile descent, moved outside the circular pattern. Division Commander Haynes gave the order again. Go ahead, England. At 11:23, England commenced her Hedgehog attack on RO-108. The firing solution predicted a 30-degree turn to starboard, speed reduction to 4 knots, depth holding at 180 feet. 4 projectiles hit, maybe 6. The explosions came so close together they sounded like one massive detonation. RO-108 broke apart immediately. No slow flooding this time, no gradual sinking. The pressure hull ruptured at multiple points simultaneously. The submarine imploded, seawater crushing every air-filled space in less than 3 seconds. 56 men died faster than their brains could process what was happening. 1 second they were at battle stations, executing evasion procedures. 3 seconds later they were dead, crushed, drowned, gone. Kill number 5. 6 days, 5 submarines, 279 Japanese sailors dead. At Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo, Admiral Toyota reviewed the situation with growing horror. 7 submarines deployed, 5 submarines missing. No distress calls, no emergency transmissions, just silence. 1 submarine every 24 hours. Like clockwork. Like a machine systematically destroying his entire submarine force. Toyota issued new orders on May 27th to the remaining submarines, RO-105 and RO-109. Abandon the NA patrol line. Run deep and silent. Minimum 400 feet depth at all times. No surface operations. No radio transmissions. No battery recharging unless absolutely critical. Become invisible. Run. RO-105 and RO-109 received these orders. Their commanders understood what those orders meant. 5 submarines were dead, and the Americans were still hunting. England, George, and Raby continued northeast along the NA line. 2 submarines left somewhere in 3,000 square miles of ocean. But the Americans still had advantages. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific intercepted Toyota's emergency orders. Every transmission revealed information about submarine positions, patrol patterns, commander intentions. The Americans knew the remaining submarines had been ordered to run deep and silent. That changed the tactical situation. Deep submarines were harder to track but also moved slower. Electric motors consumed battery power quickly at high speed. Silent submarines made less noise but also couldn't maneuver as effectively. Rapid turns and depth changes created noise that defeated the whole purpose of running silent. The mathematics remained in favor of the hunters. On May 30th, George detected RO-105 on radar at 9:45 p.m. The submarine dove immediately, but this time the Japanese commander tried something new. He went deep, 400 feet, and then stopped all engines. Complete silence, no propeller noise, no machinery vibration, nothing for sonar to detect. England established contact at 10 p.m., range 2,200 yards. But the signal was weak, intermittent. The submarine was barely moving, creating almost no sound. Sonar operators called it a knuckle, a patch of disturbed water that created false returns. The submarine could be anywhere within 200 yards of the signal. Pendleton faced a critical choice. Fire Hedgehog at a weak contact and probably miss, wasting 24 precious projectiles. Or wait for the submarine to move, give up tactical advantage, let the Japanese commander choose when to resume operations. He chose to wait. 4 hours passed in silence. The submarine stayed motionless at 400 feet. But physics created a problem the Japanese commander couldn't solve. Battery power was draining. Every minute of silent operation consumed electrical power. Sonar systems, air circulation, CO2 scrubbers, emergency lighting, all ran on battery power. The submarine was slowly dying from the inside. At 2:30 a.m. on May 31st, the sonar signal strengthened. RO-105 was moving. Battery power had dropped below critical levels. The commander had no choice, surface soon or die anyway. But RO-105's commander had one more trick. Instead of surfacing where England expected, he had been drifting with the current during those 4 silent hours. The submarine had moved 3 miles from its last known position, carried by ocean currents the Americans hadn't accounted for. George's radar caught RO-105 at 3:15 a.m. at 13,000 yards. Wrong direction, wrong bearing, wrong search grid. By the time England turned toward the new contact, RO-105 had already crash-dived. The Japanese commander had bought himself 90 seconds of surface time, 90 seconds of diesel engine charging, enough to add 10% to his depleted batteries, enough to run. England established sonar contact at 3:45. RO-105 was running deep and fast, 6 knots, heading northeast away from the hunter-killer group. This submarine commander was exceptional, the best they had faced. He had studied the previous engagements, learned from 5 dead submarines, understood that staying deep and running fast made Hedgehog attacks exponentially more difficult. The problem remained mathematics. Hedgehog projectiles sank at 23 feet per second. At 400 feet depth, projectiles took 17 seconds to reach target depth. In 17 seconds, a submarine moving at 6 knots traveled 170 feet. The firing solution had to predict exactly where the submarine would be 17 seconds in the future. Predict wrong, and the 130-foot circular pattern missed completely. Pendleton's first Hedgehog attack at 4:05 missed by 200 feet. RO-105 had turned during projectile descent, the commander anticipating the attack timing. Second attack at 4:23 missed by 100 feet. Better prediction, closer, but still wrong. The submarine was varying speed, 6 knots, then 4 knots, then 6 knots again, deliberately making the mathematics impossible to solve precisely. England had fired 48 projectiles. She had 192 remaining. 8 more attacks. 8 more chances to kill RO-105 before ammunition ran out. Division Commander Haynes watched from George with growing tension. This engagement was different from the previous 5. Those submarines had died quickly. 1 attack, 2 attacks maximum. RO-105 had survived 2 attacks and was approaching a third. The Japanese commander was winning the mathematics game. At 4:47, Pendleton's sonar operator detected a pattern in RO-105's maneuvers. The submarine turned every 4 minutes, 30 degrees to port, then 30 degrees to starboard, back and forth. The pattern was consistent, predictable. The Japanese commander thought he was being random, but human behavior creates patterns even when trying to be unpredictable. Pendleton adjusted the firing solution. He predicted the turn, led the target by 200 feet, calculated where RO-105 would be 17 seconds after projectile launch, including the turn. Third Hedgehog attack at 5:08. 24 projectiles splashed into the Pacific, descended into darkness. 4 detonations, maybe 5. Not the massive explosion of previous kills. RO-105's pressure hull was breached, but not destroyed. The submarine continued moving, flooding, but not sinking. The Japanese commander executed emergency procedures immediately. Blow ballast tanks, bring the submarine to the surface, abandon ship, save the crew. But he never got the chance. England's 4th attack at 5:32 hit with 8 detonations. RO-105 broke apart. Emergency blow procedures stopped. The crew never reached the surface. The submarine sank to 200 feet depth, imploded completely, scattered across a quarter mile of ocean floor. Oil and debris appeared at 6:15 after sunrise. Large quantities this time. The submarine had been torn into multiple sections, each section releasing its contents. Kill number 6, 12 days, 6 submarines, 335 Japanese sailors dead. Admiral Halsey received the report at 3rd Fleet Headquarters. He read it 3 times, couldn't believe what he was seeing. 6 submarines in 12 days, 1 destroyer escort, 1 weapon system that most captains still didn't trust. The record was unprecedented, unmatched, impossible by every standard of naval warfare. In the entire Atlantic theater, the most successful anti-submarine warfare ship was HMS Starling, which had sunk 7 U-boats over 2 years of operations. England had killed 6 submarines in 12 days. In the Pacific theater, no ship had killed more than 2 submarines in any single patrol. England had tripled that record. The mathematics were staggering. England had fired approximately 15 Hedgehog attacks total, achieving 6 kills. A 40% success rate. Compare that to the British depth charge statistics. 5,174 attacks, 85.5 kills, 1.65% success rate. England was 24 times more effective than depth charges. Compare it to the overall Hedgehog statistics. 268 attacks, 47 kills, 17.5% success rate. England was more than twice as effective as the Hedgehog average. 1 submarine remained from the original NA patrol line, RO-109. But Admiral Halsey issued new orders on June 1st. Pull England from submarine hunting immediately. 6 kills was enough. More than enough. The destroyer escort had proven the Hedgehog system beyond any possible doubt. Every destroyer escort in the Pacific Fleet would receive updated training based on England's action reports. Updated tactics, updated firing solutions, updated sonar tracking techniques. England's combat record would become the standard every anti-submarine warfare unit tried to match. But RO-109 was never found. The submarine had received Admiral Toyoda's warning transmission after RO-108 died. The commander abandoned his patrol station immediately, ran deep and silent toward Truk, stayed at 500 feet depth for 3 days straight, barely moving, conserving every amp of battery power. RO-109 survived the war. She surrendered in August 1945 at Truk Lagoon. Her crew learned about the NA Line massacre months later when they were debriefed by American intelligence officers. They learned that 6 of their squadron submarines had been destroyed in 12 days by one ship using a weapon they had never heard of. The Presidential Unit citation arrived in July 1944. England was one of only 3 destroyer escorts to receive this honor during the entire war. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese submarines." The words were bureaucratic, dry, insufficient to capture what England's crew had accomplished. But the mathematics told the real story. British forces launched 5,374 depth charge attacks during the war. 85.5 confirmed kills. 1.65% success rate. Hedgehog attacks before England's patrol showed 5% success rate. 1 kill for every 20 attacks. England achieved 6 kills from approximately 15 attacks. 40% success rate. 25 times more effective than depth charges. 8 times more effective than the Hedgehog average. The weapon system became standard equipment on every destroyer escort by September 1944. Training protocols changed across the fleet. Sonar operators studied England's tracking techniques, how to maintain contact through radical turns, how to predict depth changes, how to calculate firing solutions, accounting for submarine evasion tactics. Hedgehog crews practiced England's loading procedures, 90 seconds from empty launchers to ready to fire. Fire control officers memorized England's mathematical formulas for predicting submarine positions based on speed, depth, turn radius, projectile descent time. In the Atlantic, Hedgehog sank 47 German U-boats by war's end. 268 total attacks, 47 kills, 17.5% success rate. Still the best anti-submarine weapon of the war in terms of overall statistics. But no ship anywhere matched England's 12-day record. Not in the Atlantic, not in the Pacific, not in any theater of operations. HMS Starling's 7 U-boats took 2 years. England's 6 submarines took 12 days. Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton received the Navy Cross in August 1944. Single decoration for 6 submarines. The citation mentioned his tactical brilliance, his crew's discipline and training, the weapon system's effectiveness and proper employment. But the citation didn't mention the one thing that mattered most to Pendleton: mathematics. He had trusted numbers when other captains trusted tradition. He had calculated firing solutions while others relied on experience and intuition. He had predicted submarine movements using mathematics while others guessed based on instinct. The numbers had been right. Mathematics had won. England continued escort duty through summer 1944. Convoy protection, carrier screening, anti-submarine patrols. She never found another submarine, never fired Hedgehog in combat again. For 4 months, the most successful submarine hunter in naval history escorted cargo ships and carrier task forces without seeing another enemy contact. Then, October 31st, 1944, off Leyte Gulf, England was providing escort for logistics ships supporting the invasion forces. The kamikaze attacks had intensified, Japanese pilots deliberately crashing their aircraft into American ships, sacrificing themselves to damage or destroy high-value targets. A kamikaze aircraft broke through the combat air patrol at 2:15 p.m. It dove on England from 8,000 feet, trailing smoke, engine screaming. The 3-inch guns fired, tracers filling the sky. The aircraft shuddered under multiple hits but kept coming. It struck England's forward engine room at 2:17. The bomb penetrated the deck, exploded inside the engine room, killed 37 crew members instantly, wounded 25 more. The explosion ruptured steam lines, shattered the forward engine, breached the hull in 3 locations. Seawater flooded in. The ship listed 12 degrees to starboard. Fire spread through 3 compartments. Damage control teams fought for 4 hours to save the ship. They sealed bulkheads, pumped out flooded compartments, extinguished fires, shore up collapsed decking. England survived but barely. The damage was catastrophic. Navy surveyors inspected the wreck in November. Their report was blunt. Repairs would take 6 months minimum, cost more than building a new destroyer escort. The forward engine room was destroyed beyond repair. The keel was cracked in 2 places. Structural frames were bent. The ship would never be combat effective again, even if repaired. The Navy made a cold calculation. England wasn't worth saving. She was towed to Manus Island, stripped of all useful equipment, guns, radar, sonar, fire control systems, even the Hedgehog launchers. Everything valuable was removed for installation on other ships. The hull was sold for scrap in November 1946. England, the ship that had sunk 6 submarines in 12 days, the ship Admiral King had promised would always exist in the U.S. Navy, ended her life being cut apart in a salvage yard. The metal was melted down, turned into razor blades, tin cans, rebar for construction projects. Within 2 years, USS England had vanished completely from the fleet. The greatest submarine killer in naval history became razor blades. But the record stood. Still stands today, 80 years later. No ship has matched 6 submarine kills in 12 days. The record is mathematically unlikely to ever be broken. Modern submarines are quieter, faster, equipped with better sensors. Modern anti-submarine warfare is dominated by helicopters and patrol aircraft. Surface ships rarely get chances to hunt submarines in extended engagements anymore. England's 12 days represent a unique moment in naval history, when submarines were still vulnerable enough to hunt effectively but dangerous enough to matter strategically. When surface ships had weapons effective enough to kill submarines, but submarines had enough numbers to require intensive hunting. When code-breaking gave attackers enough intelligence to find submarines, but submarines still had tactics effective enough to evade attacks. That moment lasted from 1942 to 1945. In that window, England achieved something no ship before or since has matched. Walton Pendleton survived the kamikaze attack. He was promoted to commander in December 1944, given command of an entire escort division in Alaska, spent the final year of the war hunting Japanese submarines in the North Pacific. He never found any. The Japanese had pulled their submarines back to defend the home islands. The hunting grounds were empty. The war ended in August 1945. Pendleton stayed in the Navy, commanded various shore installations, served in administrative positions. He retired in 1961 after 34 years of service. He died in 1973 at age 66. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His gravestone mentions the Navy Cross, mentions his rank, mentions his years of service, doesn't mention the 6 submarines, doesn't mention the 12 days that changed anti-submarine warfare forever, doesn't mention that he commanded the most successful submarine hunter in naval history. The Navy kept its promise, sort of. In October 1960, a new guided missile cruiser was commissioned. USS England, hull number DLG-22, later reclassified as CG-22. She served from 1962 until 1994, 32 years of service, longer than the original England lasted. But when CG-22 was decommissioned in 1994, the name England disappeared from the fleet roster. Admiral King's promise, "There'll always be an England in the United States Navy," was broken. There hasn't been a USS England since 1994, 30 years and counting. The original Hedgehog launcher from USS England sits in storage at the National Museum of the United States Navy in Washington, D.C. It's rusted, forgotten, stored in a warehouse with thousands of other artifacts. Most visitors to the museum walk past without noticing. The placard mentions the weapon's success rate, 17.5% overall, best anti-submarine weapon of World War II. The placard doesn't mention England, doesn't mention Pendleton, doesn't mention the 12 days that proved the system worked better than anyone imagined possible. Japanese records recovered after the war confirmed all 6 kills. I-16, RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-108, RO-105. Each submarine's final known position matched England's attack coordinates exactly. 335 sailors confirmed dead. The Japanese Navy never understood what killed them so efficiently. Their action reports from surviving submarine commanders mentioned explosions above, flooding below, death within minutes. But nobody survived the attacks to describe the circular pattern of projectiles, the contact fuses, the forward-throwing mortars that maintained sonar contact throughout each attack. The British developed Hedgehog in 1941. The Americans perfected the tactics in 1943. England proved it worked in 1944. But history remembers aircraft carriers, battleships, fleet destroyers. The big ships with the big guns and the famous names: Enterprise, Yorktown, Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri. Destroyer escorts were expendable, cheap to build, easy to replace. The Navy built 563 destroyer escorts during World War II. Most were scrapped within 5 years after the war ended. They weren't glamorous enough to preserve, weren't historically significant enough to turn into museum ships. England lasted 2 years after the war, scrapped at age 2.5. The ship that sunk 6 submarines in 12 days wasn't worth the metal she was made from. But the mathematics don't lie. 6 submarines, 12 days, 335 enemy sailors killed, approximately 15 Hedgehog attacks, 40% success rate, 25 times more effective than depth charges, 8 times more effective than the Hedgehog average. Those numbers changed naval warfare. Every destroyer escort built after June 1944 included Hedgehog as standard equipment. Training protocols referenced England's tactics. Fire control solutions used England's mathematical formulas. Sonar operators studied England's tracking techniques. In the Atlantic, Hedgehog sank 47 U-boats between England's patrol in May 1944 and the end of the war in May 1945. Before England's patrol, captains didn't trust the weapon. After England's patrol, Hedgehog became the standard anti-submarine weapon throughout the Allied navies. One ship changed doctrine for entire fleets. That's the story of USS England, not a battleship, not an aircraft carrier, not a fleet destroyer with big guns and a famous name. Just a Buckley-class destroyer escort, 77 feet shorter than a real destroyer, armed with 3-inch pop guns and a weapon nobody trusted. Until Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton trusted the mathematics. And the mathematics were right. If this story moved you the way it should, hit that like button right now. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who need to hear it. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single week. Stories about sailors who trusted mathematics over tradition. Real people, real heroism. Real history that deserves to be remembered. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Our community stretches across the entire world. Texas, Germany, Japan, Australia, Philippines, United States, United Kingdom. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure USS England and her crew don't disappear into silence. These men trusted mathematics when everyone else trusted tradition. They killed 6 submarines in 12 days. They changed naval warfare forever. They deserve to be remembered. And you're helping make that happen.